So I've got a panel packed here with some visual journal experts for you tonight. And we are going to get started in about a minute or two, as soon as I see this counter kind of slow down.
Let's have some fun, fellas.
Yeah, all right. So I'm gonna start kicking things off here. Looks like our participant level has started to kind of slow down there. So very quickly, my name is David Modler. I'm an associate professor of art at Shepherd University. It's in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. I live in Maryland, which is only about an hour from my school, so it's not too far, all online right now, so it doesn't make too much difference. I'm also one half of the journal Fodder Junkies and one of the co-founders of the Draw and Play Here initiative with Sam Peck. And I brought this panel together because the five of us have been working together for almost a decade now, and have sort of moved into different facets in our careers, and thought it was a good opportunity to sort of revisit where we all are with our visual journal work and strategies that we employ as artists, as researchers, as teachers, in different kinds of perspectives. So this idea of the multifaceted approach for application with the visual journal is really sort of our focus of what we'd like to talk about. The panel is made up of art educators from K-12, higher ed, community-based perspectives, and we're just here to share our ideas about visual journals, how we think it builds a solid foundation for art students of any age and any kind of program. And when we think about foundation, we're thinking about stylistic approaches, how someone conceptualizes a visual journal, the context in which they're using that book, and the kinds of choices that we can allow ourselves and our students to make as art makers. So just so that you know, there is a slideshow that's just rolling through, and these are all images from various journals that we have either worked in, collaborated with, or directed students to create. And so that show is about 70 to 80 images. It's just going to rotate and just keep sort of rolling along through our talk. So I want to pass it off to, I'm just going to look at my screen. I see Eric Scott at the top there. So I'm just going to pass it off to Eric Scott for a quick intro, and then we'll start having some dialogue between the five of us and answering questions that are posed to us in the chats.
All right, well, I'm Eric Scott. Dave and I formed the journal Fodder Junkies officially about 15, 20 years ago now. It's been so long, can't remember. I'm a former public school art teacher, and about 4.5 years ago, I ran away from teaching in public school. And so I really applaud everyone that's still involved with that. I moved into more of the community aspect of it, and I manage and teach at a local art center, as well as travel and teach. And so the visual journal really became a really key part of my teaching, but also my own art making. I got into journaling because of my own art making, and then wanted to share it with students. And the great thing now is, yeah, I did it while I was teaching public school, both at the high school level and at the elementary level. But now, you know, I get to teach without grades. I mean, that's just a phenomenal thing where I don't have the pressure of giving out grades. I don't have administrators breathing down my neck. So now I do a wide variety. Before the pandemic, I was able to travel and do a lot of in-person workshops, retreats, you know, classes and such. I work with school groups, I work with adults, I work with just a lot of different people. And so what's great about what I'm able to do now is I can teach an entire weekend or week with the visual journal. And what I found is that for me, yeah, I love teaching the technique, and I love talking about the journal and sharing my passion for art. But what I find is that the visual journal really becomes a place for growth. I always refer to it as an everything book. And for me, it was a place where I could put everything in there. And for me personally, it became a place to explore and reflect and try out different things. And what I found is that it really helped me grow. So it helped me grow personally, helped me grow creatively, and it helped me grow spiritually. And so I really love being able to bring that now to my students, especially whenever I'm working with adults. And so, I mean, I can work with anybody from, 5 years old all the way up to like 95, if not older. But I love kind of bringing the power of the journal into those, into like the lives of people, and really sharing how that can really affect them. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, if you're in this, if you see the same order I see, Eric, I was going to hand it over to Michael Dodson and
Okay.
have him give you a quick intro about where he is and what he's up to with visual
Right.
journals.
Okay. Well, I'm Michael Dodson, and I'm in my 27th year teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade visual art at French Prairie Middle School in Woodburn, Oregon. That's about an hour south of Portland, Oregon. And I've been using, I'll say I started out using sketchbooks initially, but that was mostly just kind of an archive of work students had done. But then several years ago, I met these gentlemen at a national conference and started looking at visual journals and the work that they were doing there. And initially I was sort of a super fan of their work. But they, as these guys do, they welcomed me into the fold, and I've been working with them a lot since then. And it's really revolutionized the way that I teach my students. I use the journals as a way for them to not just archive their ideas, but as a way for them to build identity as creative people, to kind of learn more about themselves, but also as a safe space for them to express themselves, and to encourage them to take chances, and to build on the creative ideas that they have and then that others have, and incorporating all of that stuff together. Thanks, Dave.
Great, thank you, Michael. And I'll move on to Sam Peck and let him give us a quick intro about what's going on with him these days.
My name's Sam Peck, as Dave said. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm a University of Minnesota PhD student. My research is about the visual journal. Like Dave said, I am a member actant, as we've recently rethought of our existence with this project of Touch, I Draw, and Play Here. Dave and I also began that project. I don't know if a lot of people think about that as authorship, but I'm trying to stay away from that idea of ownership, because there are many different owners of the project, especially as collaborators within it and amongst it. Especially these gentlemen that I'm presenting with, they're all involved. I met Dave and Eric at NCAT, the North Carolina Center for the Advancement of Teaching, and that really sparked my step into the visual journal space, revolutionized my teaching, and it helped me get into grad school, which is a whole another long story. But I have an MFA and a BFA, one from my MFA from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I have a BFA from University of Rhode Island. Both places I focused on printmaking, but visual journal and sketchbooks are a big part of my practice. Currently in my PhD program, I'm studying curriculum instruction and working towards making the visual journal and collaboration within it the thought process or the center point of how I think about and express this work. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, and then last but not least, Michael Bell. Please introduce yourself. Let us know what's been going on with you these days.
Sure, my friend. Glad to be back for this round 2. This is a good time. For those of you, I'm an author, I'm a TED speaker, a visual journaling pioneer. Been working with these guys for well over a decade now, and I'm currently serving as supervisor of visual and performing arts in Queen Anne's County Public Schools in Maryland. As Eric describes the visual journal as his everything book, also for me, everything I do in this world has meaning behind it. And it's very rooted in the visual journal and the process. Challenging the process takes practice. I will tell you that. And it's not for the faint of heart. And if you want to stay endlessly motivated, not being afraid of failure is truly the key, and to instill that element of risk taking in your kids. So if you want to change, if you want to change the world, or at least the culture or the climate that is within your classes, it all really, for me, it's always begun with the relationship process that you forge, and it all starts with why. And with visual journaling, for me, that's become that why, the process, the way to record life's experiences, feelings, emotional reactions, our inner voice, visually and verbally, that attraction for me between images and words and how they interplay. And whether it's a traditional sketchbook, an altered book, a very non-traditional journal, everything that explores both text and imagery has become very important piece to me. So that process, it encourages students to really get to know themselves on a deeper intrinsic level. And while they can explore themes, big ideas around their daily life, it's really an effective way to break down those walls of communication between you and the student, and you can start paying a closer attention to their process and being that guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage. So I ask everyone, engage in the process first, and as we go round robin here, I'll share a little bit more of my process and even my 31 Nights project, which became a big groundbreaking idea that's rooted in the power of the prompt and the visual journals.
All right, thank you guys. So just to kind of round off the intros a bit, currently I'm teaching at the university level, so I coordinate an art education program, but I also get an opportunity to teach a course in the summers that's a studio course in visual journals. So I'll get students from across the university, mostly art students, but sometimes every once in a while a journaling student or someone in the communications program will come into the class. So there's lots of opportunities there. My art ed students keep the visual journal as their notebook for all of their coursework. It's in a lot of the classes that I teach, it is the only book that they have. There might be some articles we read, but the journal becomes the place where the documentation of what they're learning and thinking about occurs, their reflection on their practice, experimentation with materials and ideas for curriculum, and many other kinds of observations they make in and outside of the classroom occur in that journal. When I first got into visual journals, I was working in Loudoun County with Eric Scott in Northern Virginia, and I went to a talk and learned about Dan Eldon from Kit Grauer and Renee Sandel, and that really kicked off my practice in visual journals as a maker. And what I've discovered about myself as a teacher is that when I start to learn something as an artist, it's just this natural transition to want to share it with my students. So I never saw my journal as something that I wasn't going to bring to my classroom and have my students working with. And for me, the big transition was from the idea of the sketchbook and the teacher directed activity to the visual journal, and finding ways to open that up for more choice-based and student-directed activities. And it became one of those things in my classrooms, and still, where I never have students that come to me asking me, what do we do next? Because they always know that the journal is there, and that's the thing that is going to keep their process moving forward. So the way I'd love the rest of our talk to go tonight, and I think all of my panelists are on board with this, is we're going to look and see what the chatter is from the different chat rooms, and just try to speak to questions that we see and ideas that are coming up, and bounce those ideas between ourselves.
So
I think
one of the big
everybody's
questions
up to
I
that.
saw. Oh, sorry, I was just jumping in there because I'm excited to
Do it.
to kind of. But there's a couple questions that I think are kind of related, and I think we can all kind of like take a crack at them. But how, like with the visual journal, I mean, it's a place where some students really thrive, and because it can be very open-ended, and some kids love that and other kids sort of like check out. So we had that question about kids, but then we also had the question about just sort of the reluctant like adults as well. And so like, how do you get students of any age to kind of buy into the process? And I think for me, it's like I do use some prompts, and it's a lot of times it's sort of like, here, let me show you something. Now, it might be a tape transfer, or it might be working with watercolor, or it might be a technique, or it might be a concept. And then it's like, okay, what are you going to do with it? Other times I'll give not a specific prompt, but like a big idea prompt, like, identity, or I believe kind of thing, and do some writing. So sometimes it's a directed kind of thing, like let's do some stream of consciousness writing. Other times it's just sort of like, here, let me show you some things. Now go and explore it on your own. And I think that kind of gets people kind of started. So I don't know if anybody else wants to share how they get reluctant
Sure.
people.
Well, I teach
Go ahead, Michael Dodson.
I teach middle level kids. And so they come to me skeptical. Many of them do. They don't have a lot of background in making art, or they don't see themselves as artists. They have already, I mean, if you remember when you were in middle school, or if you have taught middle school, these kids come to us with this sort of identity intact. This is what I do. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. And so when you ask them to do things like take creative chances, especially when what they do is visible, right? It's like a record of their idea. They're intimidated. They're worried. They short circuit themselves, I guess is the best way to say it. So I feel like one of the things that I use visual journals for is to give them chances to begin, just like, I mean, even if it's just simple mark making, but whatever it is, whatever creative ideas I'm asking them to do, I do it with them. I play a role in that. Maybe I initiate it, and then I have them do something too, like maybe they alter some work that I've already started. And I begin to try and cultivate this community of sort of creatively flexible kids who they're focused mostly on what's in front of them and not what's ahead of them. So they sort of lose themselves in it. And then all of a sudden, after a while, they're like, whoa, I've got like 10 pages that show me I got some good stuff in me. And then it's like, well, okay, then let's take a look at that again. So are you an artist or are you not? Do you have creative ideas or not? Remember, take a look at all this stuff you've done. And they're like, whoa, they see themselves in a different way. The journal begins to show them who they actually are rather than who they think they are.
Yeah, and Michael Dodson, I'd like to say, it's really interesting because, I mean, we have to walk the walk, right? I mean, I posted in the chat for everybody that I carry with me literally when I visit schools as a supervisor now. I've accumulated Sam can attest to this, suitcases filled with these visual journals as exemplars. And I have a contract with the kids. And the contract is, if you ever want this visual journal back, at some point in time, you reach out to me and I'll get it back to you. It's yours. I'll protect it and I'll keep it. But I need this because I need to show future generations what this could look like. And there's many ways to approach visual journaling. There's not just one set way. There are some kids out there that are very Da Vinci-like, where they like to record everything that happens along their way. There are some that are like Candy Jernigan that are evidence collectors, and they like to collect everything and stuff everything into these big everything books that are jam-packed. And then you have some that are just experimenting with ideas and processes. So, think about limitations as well. Michael Dodson, we talked about this last time that we were in a podcast where what's the ideal environment for a visual journal to thrive? And what if you don't have that perfect environment? So what do you do in that situation? I'm gonna bounce it back to you, Michael Dodson, and I'll open it up to the rest of everybody.
Say that again to me, Michael. How do you, what?
So what, you had mentioned before, what's the ideal environment for a visual journal to thrive when you have, all the materials you might be able to use. You love to draw, but you might have some more ideas to expand on. But what if you don't have that perfect environment? What if you're that kid that doesn't have anything? Or if you're working at home during the pandemic, for instance?
So what I would say, and I mean, it has been a little bit more of a challenge doing this, we call it comprehensive distance learning in Oregon, but in general, what I would say is you have to build on the energy in your room. And if it's lacking at the beginning, then it's sort of like you're gradually releasing that energy to them. So you're the one who comes into it. And that's, that you're the one who is offering ideas, but at every single turn, you are showing them that you see what they're doing, that you're acknowledging that, you're honoring that. Those small little steps, you're celebrating it, because at first it's going to feel uncomfortable for them. Because like I said, when they make a mark, when they do something, they think that it's not legitimate. They think that it is under, what you expect of them. And so you have to communicate that to them. So at some point they begin to seek that stuff out. I feel like at the beginning, these are just students, but by the end of class, by the time they leave me, they're artists. They may still consider themselves emerging artists, but they have this identity because I've given them all these opportunities to either choose the things they like, to show what they like, to share what they have with each other, and give all of them opportunities to support each other, to make comments on each other's work, to send each other notes. So like basically creating an environment that supports kids taking chances, but then all along the way, making sure that you're continuing to feed that energy, because the kids they'll need that from you.
And they hide their secrets in the journal too. And they're waiting for you to look in there to see if that you notice something in there, which is so cool. And that's why you got to pay attention to it. And it's like you said, you got to do it too. You got to be right there with them, doing it alongside them, so that you're leading by example. My boxing coach used to say that all the time about my own son. It's not what you show him, it's what he sees.
Like someone was saying something, I won't say their name just because I don't necessarily want to call them out. I don't know if they'd be comfortable with that, but they're curious about how can we, in a way, destigmatize this valuable learning tool so that it is looked at as a genuine research process and not a frivolous activity. That's a challenge. The person who saw that, you're feeling what we're feeling. I mean, that is legit.
Well, I think what's more legit than you have this object to look at. I remember here in Virginia, whenever all of a sudden, like what do they call it? Like student performance was put into our teacher evaluation, and that, we had to collect data. And, it was like this one colleague of mine was presenting at one of our district-wide meetings, and it was like she was saying that her principal was making her collect data, and that data had to be basically like quizzes and things like that you have numbers like of passing. And I said, you know what, we need to like help people understand that what's more authentic data than this object, this piece of paper that a student has worked on. It's like, that's data. And same thing with a journal. I mean, the great thing about journaling is you can see growth. You can actually see the growth in it. So I think like trying to get administrators, colleagues to really see that, that is like, I think, the struggle. But what more legitimate, authentic data that is there than this thing in front of you that's full of pages, full of writings from the student, drawings, doodles, collages. It's like, you want to know who somebody is, look at their journal.
Well, we talked too about problem finding and problem solving, and there's no better place for students to begin thinking about what their personal lines of inquiry might be and how they want to explore those than through a visual journal process. And Eric brought up the idea of the object, and I would also put in that idea that object, that if you want to think about the visual journal as this object that you can, everybody can get that book from the art store, or you can supply that book to your students, that once it transfers through their hands and their thoughts, it's turning into an artifact, and it's telling a story. There's a narrative there that is being revealed to you, being revealed to the student as well through that process. And I think too, it's thinking about the visual journal as an ongoing activity. This isn't a one and done. This isn't something that, oh, we did visual journals in my class. This is something that you do. and it's something that's maintained over the course of the school year. Of course, other activities and other things go on, but this tool lives through all of that. And I think that that's an important part of how the visual journal works in my coursework.
And I'd like to also say, you know, that people are discussing data, and I know data is very important. And I know that there are some districts that I'm sure you probably heard the phrase data drives the instruction. Okay. Well, I'm going to push back on that. And I've said this numerous times. Data shouldn't drive anything. Data should be the informer at best. It should be the passenger in the seat. Relationships are the driver of instruction. And you can create and build these relationships through this visual journaling process, unlike any other. And so kids are really missing this acknowledgement piece during the pandemic. They're missing that. And so the visual journal is a place where you can drop in that Post-it, let them know that you see them, that you're listening to them, that you're acknowledging them, and you're noticing patterns in their work. And this brings me to when I first created this 31 Nights project, which is based around 31 prompts. And it was done in a sketchbook, and it evolved into photography, into 3D, into many different ways around juicy titles as prompt, like The Beast, Lost You, Facing the Beast. So things that kids could really sink their teeth into. But what really happened with that 31 Nights process and how it began was because kids were asking me, how come you have a style? You know, where's my style? And the problem was that most kids, they're rooted in these projects that take weeks sometimes, and they're not producing enough work to actually recognize the sea they're swimming in. So when I created 31 Nights, it was about creating a work a night, and it was only for like 20 minutes a pop. So they could actually visibly see themselves getting better over time and using that 20-minute measure to measure visible growth over time. So there's data as well. But think of unique ways to invite kids in. And if you're passionate about it, your kids will be passionate about it, but you got to walk the walk with them.
One of the things that I remember when I first met Dave and eventually I met Sam, they showed me their visual journals. And one of the things that was just so mind-blowing to me was the way that their books became these three-dimensional things. They would open pages and stuff would come out, or stuff would recede, and they would cut windows, and they would fold paper, and all of these different things, which I thought was just amazing and engaging. And I was like, they came up with all of these ideas. This stuff was coming from them. How do I get my kids to do this kind of stuff, to really invest themselves in their visual journals in the same way? And one of the things that I did, and it was pretty simple, but it's become tried and true for me, with at least with my middle level kids. They're little, but my middle level kids is I have them cut windows in their book, because what it does is it allows them to recontextualize the visual information they're looking at. So they cut a window and they open it, and they have this image coming through, and the rest of the space is blank, and they're reimagining, what does that become on this page? Or maybe they've written words and they cut a window, and when they flip the page again, only part of the message comes through. What's a new message that you might come up with? And so it begins to build not only sort of this, I think I've said this before, but this creative flexibility in them, so that they don't get stuck on one idea, because that's another thing that I struggle with my kids. They have a plan, and if it doesn't work out, they're done. Rather than looking at it as, that didn't quite work, but I'm gonna push through, I'm gonna persevere, and this is gonna turn out to be something else, but maybe even more meaningful. So it allows them to do that, but it also means that a part of their creative process is always looking at what might be and being okay with that, and learning to be more confident with that, because that draws on their unique ideas. I did not give that to them, because they're recontextualizing work they made. And that is a very, very valuable thing for them. And it's something I couldn't get at until I started doing these things with the visual journal, because then, and it's kind of like Michael Bell was saying, it begins to level where they are. You've got these Da Vinci kids, and you've got these kids who do not even think they belong in the room. And they're all engaging in this really valuable work because it's based on their ideas. And how validating is that?
And I was going to say too, adding on to what you're saying there, Michael, just that, you know, when we think about the studio habits of mind, and we think about how kids are stretching and exploring with material, with the visual journal, with whatever the concepts might be. But when they get to that space where they can really start to, to push that practice forward and really persist with what they're thinking about, and especially when it can be the work that they generated, and what they're really starting to persist with is their own ideas. And I think that's where they start to really see that evidence, as you were pointing out earlier, like, look at all that stuff that you have in that book. Are you still going to tell me you're not an artist? And I think the evidence is proof enough for you, and I think it starts to become proof enough for the kid, and you start to convince them whether they like it or not. You start to convince them that we're all in this.
Just to jump in on this evidence-based research, blah blah blah. A lot of that comes from the quantitative area, and
we talk phenomenology for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I can go there, but I'm not gonna.
I'm just messing with you.
Of course, if anybody doesn't know, I love talking about post-intentional phenomenology, but that's a talk for another day. Just to jump into this evidence-based quantitative thinking, our whole field is evidence. I don't understand why we're not just like, it's everywhere. It's all around us. The kids' work is evidence of the research being done in space. The artworks that are, our history. I mean, and I want to say it's the longest history of any cultural object and field in the world. We have stuff from 35,000 BC. So plus on top of that, the Gregorian calendar. So we're talking about, 37,000 years ago, some of the first artworks all the way up until today. If you need more evidence of the history of art and its importance and value, I mean, I don't understand what administrator can't fall over upon themselves. The evidence of what's known or thought about, is the product. And as Dave will say, many accreditations for colleges and universities are based upon the exhibition as product of research and thought and work done. So that's often the way that we think. Much of the discussion about, what's the value of an arts education is talked about as the product, but it's also in the process. And the visual journal, I would say, is one of the best ways to demonstrate evidence over time, especially to kids themselves. This book will show you where you started and where you end my class. If you're worried about not knowing at the beginning, look at where you arrive at the end. I think, working with Michael Bell in Maryland as a K through 12 educator, a high school educator, that's how I sold it to kids right from the beginning. You're going to use this, and I guarantee you're not sure how good you are. You doubt yourself. Over a week, just give me a week, and I will show you the value of this course.
Yeah, and Sam, didn't we go from 100 scholastic art entries, many of them rooted in the visual journal, to 500 in 1 year? I mean,
yeah, I submitted 125 myself while I worked for Michael Bell. Never mind, and many of those kids were, foundations level 1 kids who I taught, your photography level 1 kids who both use the visual journal throughout the entire curriculum. And I would say, as I discussed in the chat, that I just dropped a book in there from UBC, which talks about visual journals and visual organizers and visual thinking. But it's pedagogy in the new tonality. I've been saying so many things today that my brain is like, whoa, I can't even get the words out right. Sorry. But I just wanted to mention that book because it talks about the visual journal cross curricula. We're often talked about the visual journal is only for an arts education. This book demonstrates that people use it in math, social studies, science, and they talk in essay format, and they provide examples of how it's used and done. And I would say many people do. Michael Bell talked about collaboration, and Michael DODSON talked about building community. But I would like to point out that some of these images that we show are of us working with our kids and allowing kids to work on our visual journals, which are often open inside on our desks. I warn my kids oftentimes that's my adult journal. So you might see things like, there's a double middle finger there. dropped in the images. I told my kids, you know, there's adult things inside the book, you know, if you get upset about it. And I mentioned it to my parents, you know, if I ever get that email, you know, my book is my book, and there is stuff that's from in school and outside of school. I try to keep anything that's like, you know, really inappropriate for kids to have any discussion outside of the book. But I also mention to kids that if there's anything in your book you don't want to show me, or in my book I don't want you to see, it's paper clipped.
Yeah, and Sam, you know, you bring up a really good point too, which I think everybody needs to. I mean, we're in a very, lack of a better way to put it, an ultra sensitive age. So I get it where we, you know, people are going to be worried about what kids are going to be putting in there. But I always had the no censor rule in the visual journal. And, you know, unless I saw something that was like life threatening in there that I needed to report, you've got to, your kids have to have a safe place. Am I right? I mean, they have to have some place that is their own, that they can be just themselves. And, you know, throughout history, I mean, we were able to present the visual journal as to our administration back when I was teaching as a valuable cross-curricular tool to support literacy. Now, I'll expand on that and double down and say that I've actually been working with our ELA supervisor at the district level, because they're working on big ideas and they're also working on essential questions that are actually very interesting and that could play off of what it is that we do. And so for kids, for those of you just starting out, I mean, you have to walk them through some stuff. So, you know, for me, I always walk them through the process of reflective thinking and the record of image making. I would share with them that throughout history, great thinkers recorded and reflected in their ideas using a variety of visual journaling techniques, from Thomas Edison's light bulb sketches to Stephen Hawking's space diagrams to Da Vinci's visual journals as his record of image making, Edvard Munch's poems, Van Gogh, Frida Kahlo's diaries, Candy Jernigan's evidence collecting. I mean, they're all over the place. And so not every kid is going to explore the visual journaling process in the same way, which is why you want to expand out and let the kids share with one another, so it encourages them and it breaks down those walls of communication and allows them to be moved beyond their immediate situation and into that realm of process, where process is king, where process is more important than product because it will fuel the product. So
you're saying, Sam, you were saying that thing earlier about like how, you know, how this can, I mean, it can find a space in like any content. And I can't remember the name of the TED Talk, but it was something, we've talked about this before, but where someone was saying, I don't really understand it until I can draw it, until I can make it visual. But I feel like for my kids, I can't say this to them. They have to do this in real time. But visual journals for them, it basically challenges some common understandings about what art is and what art isn't. And it forces, and they're allowed to sort of push through that and to discover it's way more than what you think it is. And it doesn't exclude you, it includes you.
And I was gonna just kind of say it's, in a way, both Michaels have sort of given us a little bit of a synopsis of where they're thinking with the visual journal. And I wanted to give Eric and Sam a chance, if you had sort of like a departing remark for everyone. We're coming up on our 4:45. We could talk about this for hours. But if you had some a closing remark or a statement, you know, based on what we've talked about here, things you've seen in the chat, something you would leave the folks with as a takeaway from this discussion and from any thoughts they might have about visual journals. So Eric, why don't you go first, and then I'll get Sam to go.
Actually, I think Sam's like, he seemed very excited.
Oh,
so
he's rare. Okay, if you're ready, you got the gloves on.
I'm raring to go. Well, I want to say first that I want to share love for all these gentlemen that I'm working with. I feel very special to be here with them. Very grateful for their friendships. I'm very lucky to be here with them. And I want to give a shout out to some of the work that Eric Scott has been doing on his social media page, because there's been lots of questions about prompts. Eric Scott, if you don't know, has a very abundant and amazing social media presence. And if you don't know, all of these guys can be brought to you. You know, you can hire and bring them to your school or have them jump in and do work for you. They all need that shout out. But I also want to say, if you've been asking about prompts, that guy, Eric Scott, he's been doing this awesome thing with his Monsters project. It's incredible. And there's a book written by both David Modler and Eric Scott that talks about prompts. I know that Michael Dodson's been working on some last year. Michael Bell has an amazing assortment of them. But the book is called Ammunition for the Art Addict. It's the first book by the journal Fodder Junkies. I believe you can order it on Amazon. And my closing remarks is I give these gentlemen love. I know there's not a lot of diversity here demonstrated in this panel outside of the diversity of where we're from and our experiences. Yeah, but I do want to speak to that briefly. That we are inclusive in our collaborations that are across genres, and there is some amazingness that happens here. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I'm not going to volunteer anybody else's information, but I have put some of mine out there. If you have questions, feel free to email me afterwards. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We love you too, Sam. Much love to you.
Yeah, love you, Sam. Thanks for the shout out. I just kind of, my last closing remarks would just be that it's the journaling is something that I had to get into, and I think we teach what we do. You know, it's like what we do, that's what we teach, and that's what we teach with passion. You know, it's like, it's amazing to walk into classrooms and you can tell like if the teacher is a 3D artist or a 2D artist, because it's like, what are they emphasizing? And so for me, I love the visual journal, and I really just got into it myself. And then what I found was like, I got passionate about it, and then, you know, I just did it for myself, and then my kids would come over like, what is this? And then I was sharing it with them, and before I know it, it was like it became a real big part of my curriculum. So I think like just doing it for yourself as a place to connect with yourself, with your art, with your whatever, you know, it's like I was saying, that place for personal, creative, and sort of spiritual growth. And I'd say, you know, just do it for yourself, and then you'll figure out a way to ease into it with your kids. And yeah, and I'm going to pop my contact info in the chat as well. But anyway,
okay.
So
Thanks,
that's
Eric. So I think my closing thing would be similar to what is being said, but as a professor at the university training the students coming through my art school that want to be teachers, my main focus for them is for them to maintain their studio practice. As they become teachers, don't get transferred over to a school teacher who happens to teach art. It's like you need to maintain that identity as a maker. You need to establish it when you get your job. Sometimes you need to shout it. You need to go to the school board and honor it. You need to be willing to go to that administrator's office and pronounce and proclaim what it is that you do and its importance, and recognize the fact that in many cases, you are the sole expert in your field in that building. And maybe there's someone there that's taught longer than you, but there's nobody there that knows more about art and art education than you. And the Visual Journal has served me in 12 years now teaching higher ed. Every kid that's come through my program that's wanted a job, got a job. So I feel very confident that maintaining their studio practice, the Visual Journal has been a key to that, and they carry that forward and they share that with their students when they get their classrooms as well. So technically we're out of time, but I am sure that we can hang here till they kick us out and riff a bit longer. So if folks want to hang out with us, that's great. But I know you may have other things that you're heading out to do. So I'm open it up to my panel. If there's something that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you want to bring up and just kind of like chit chat about until NAEA tells us we're done.
I had two things that came to mind whenever everyone was talking that I kind of wanted to just drop my 2 cents in. The first was talking about, Michael Bell was talking about like the kids needing a space. I do want to say that like I always told my students, especially at the high school level, is that this was a school project. So the principal, the superintendent, all had a right to see what they did in their books. And I think it's something that you have to kind of tell kids, because then if they put something in there and they get in trouble for it, then they're going to say, well, my teacher told me I could put anything in there. And so I'd always tell them that. But then I would tell them, like, I respected their privacy, paperclip the pages together. But then I always told them, if I saw something where, legally I'm bound to report if you're going to, self-harm, harm others or whatever, it's like there are some things in there that I am legally bound to report to higher ups. So I always told them, I said, it is a school project. And it's like, if you really like love that journaling and that process, and you really need to have like that for your own personal space, it's like you could always have a private one that you do at home. So that was like kind of the first thing. And the other thing I wanted to kind of mention, because people had asked about it in the comments, and we haven't really had a chance to kind of talk about it, but is the idea of grading. Like, yes, we have to put in grades. And I think the idea of rubrics is out there, and that's kind of, I think, I don't know if we all kind of had used rubrics when we needed a grade, but that's definitely something that is just kind of helps you sort of quantify something that's just so qualitative.
And if anybody, I put my emails in the chat. If anybody wants to see some of the rubrics that I've developed and used with my students at the university level with visual journals, feel free to send me an email, and I will send you some of the different things that we've worked with.
So somebody just mentioned,
we've talked about. Oh, sorry, Eric.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just saw in the comments somebody asked like about all the pages and all the stuff that like what I do with it all, and then it's like over my shoulder, I've got 20 some volumes of books there. So, just.
And I told them I raid your recycle box any chance I get.
So sorry, Sam.
It's okay. I just wanted to mention that we talked about quantitative and qualitative, but that's not a spectrum. It's not a binary. There's a field of work out there, and I would say art-based research, art practice as research, artistic research, which is huge in the European and Asian world. Some reason it's not as big in the continental United States, and research creation, which has been really big in Canada recently. I know there's a couple of people who are working in that space now currently. Many of those spaces are very wide open, and there is a plethora of people even doing research in comics, which is something we will talk about tonight, just to plug our presentation. If you don't know, Modules of Mischief and Mayhem will be tonight, and we'd love to see you from 7 to 9 p.m.
So if you have a visual journal and you're just itching to do something in it, we got some stuff for you.
Come and hang out.
Or just come and make art.
Yeah, that's true.
Beautiful.
All
Thanks,
right, guys.
fellas.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
So I think
Always.
that's a wrap. And thank everyone for coming out and listening in on the conversation. Look for us at future NAEA events. I'm positive that this conversation is going to continue. You'll either find us in another session, or probably
We're doing a keynote at your state
in the lobby or somewhere else, or bring us on into your state conference, and we will bring a keynote and a workshop to you and your colleagues. Thank you so much. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you all.
Bye.